Right now, we are looking at a situation where oil could potentially hit like $150 to $200 a barrel. I mean, it's April 2026, and the entire world is just bracing for a devastating energy crisis because of this broader conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Iran.
Yeah, the global reaction is intense. European markets are basically in a freefall panic. Global shipping is frantically rerouting. And, marine insurance premiums are just absolutely skyrocketing right now.
Right, which makes sense on paper. But here is the massive, almost mind-bending global irony that we're looking at today. Israel, the country right at the absolute center of this geopolitical storm, is somehow largely insulated from the exact energy shock that it helped trigger.
It really is a fascinating paradox. I mean, you have the epicenter of the conflict essentially operating in a bubble. So our mission for today's deep dive is to unpack this newly surfaced market intelligence from Metallarari.
And this data is wild.
It really is. We are going to look at the secret, highly resilient roots of Israeli oil because they managed to completely bypass the world's most vulnerable energy choke points. And what that reveals about the invisible machinery of global power is, well, it's staggering.
It changes how you look at everything. And, for you listening, you might just be worried about how this Middle East conflict is going to affect your local gas prices, right?
Okay.
Or the broader economy.
That's what hits home for most people.
Exactly. But understanding why certain countries completely panic during an energy crisis and others they just don't, well, that is the ultimate cheat code to understanding global geopolitics.
Absolutely. So to understand why the rest of the world is panicking while Israel isn't, you have to look at the geography of vulnerability, specifically the baseline dependence on the Persian Gulf.
Right. And the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, that specific waterway, that is the root of the current panic, especially for countries in Europe. I mean, this global oil shock is not going to hit everyone equally. For a massive portion of the industrialized world, their entire energy security is tied to the daily flow through that one narrow choke point.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because it's like standing in the eye of a hurricane. The winds are literally tearing the whole neighborhood apart, ripping the roof off the global economy. But right in the center, it's just bizarrely calm.
That's a great way to put it.
Why isn't Israel relying on the oil that's essentially sitting right in its own backyard?
Well, what's fascinating here is that this immunity isn't an accident. It is a very deliberate, highly calculated uncoupling from the Strait of Hormuz.
They just completely opted out.
They entirely opted out because
Yeah.
their supply network bypasses that specific geography. They simply don't feel the economic tremors that are shaking all the European importers right now. They severed that connection years ago.
Which forces the question, right? If a nation sitting right there in the Middle East is deliberately avoiding Middle Eastern oil, where is their baseline supply actually coming from?
Right, the logistics of it.
Yeah, moving from the concept of resilience to the hard data. Because the Metallarari dossier shows that about 70% of Israel's crude oil imports come from just two countries.
It's two, Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan.
Which is crazy to me.
It's a huge concentration. In fact, in 2025, Azerbaijan alone accounted for a massive 46.4% of Israel's petroleum imports.
Almost half from one single country.
Right. Nearly half of their entire crude requirement is sourced from a single non-Arab state in the Caucasus. And it gets there via a very specific route.
The pipeline, right.
Yeah, the oil travels via pipeline from Azerbaijan, goes through Georgia, and then it runs straight through Turkey.
Wait, it goes straight through Turkey?
Yes, it arrives at the Turkish port of Ceyhan, and from there, it is shipped across the Mediterranean directly to Israel. And they also have other crude sources backing that up.
Like where?
Places like Nigeria, whose share was actually increasing a lot in 2025, plus Brazil and Gabon.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me, just looking at the geopolitical reality of this. We are talking about a geopolitical VPN here. I mean, Turkey and Israel are often engaged in this fierce, really hostile political rhetoric, right?
Oh, constantly. Very public clashes.
Right. But this absolutely vital oil pipeline runs right through Turkish territory to get to Israel. It's like you're routing your most essential survival resource through a territory that politically opposes you, but commercially supports you.
Exactly. And the source explicitly highlights how incredible that dynamic is. This road involves international banks, ports, massive insurance policies, and multiple sovereign borders.
It's massively complex.
But the geography and the political posturing are treated as a mere administrative detail when it comes to the flow of oil.
An administrative detail. Wow, that just strips all the emotion right out of it.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because commercial interests just quietly override the political theater. Turkey benefits economically from being that essential energy hub.
Right, they get transit fees.
Huge transit fees. Shutting it down wouldn't just be a diplomatic jab at Israel. It would mean defaulting on long-term contracts with international energy majors. It would destroy Turkey's own reliability in the market. So the crude just keeps flowing.
Okay, so that covers the crude oil, which, because it's in a massive pipeline, is relatively transparent. But, you can't just put crude oil into a fighter jet or a delivery truck.
No, you definitely cannot. And that's where we shift into the much murkier world of refined petroleum products. While crude logistics are mostly out in the open, refined products are a completely different story.
And who is the dominant player supplying all this refined stuff?
Russia. Russia is the massive player here. The report estimates they provide nearly half of the total refined products, which comes out to around 28% of all petroleum imports in 2025.
Wait, almost 30% is Russian in this current sanctions environment? How does that even work?
It takes a lot of sophisticated maneuvering. This network utilizes these regional Mediterranean hubs, places like Greece, Italy, and Cyprus. And the report describes the logistics here as, quote, not always transparent.
Not always transparent, which is basically just an incredibly polite way of saying it's a shadow fleet.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. The dossier outlines all these storage triangulations, shadowy maritime routes, and cargo ships that literally change their commercial identity mid-voyage.
Which sounds like something straight out of a spy novel. I mean, how does a massive multi-ton oil tanker just change its identity in the middle of the ocean?
I know it sounds like pure espionage.
It really does. Do they just paint over the name on the side of the boat?
Well, no, it's mostly paperwork and transponders.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is exactly how nations bypass sanctions and avoid political blowback.
Okay, break that down for me.
Sure. And just to be clear, we maintain strict impartiality here. We are just neutrally reporting what the Metallurary intelligence found. But basically, global energy markets often operate in the shadows just to keep the lights on, regardless of the public alliances or conflicts involved.
Right, money talks. So how does the identity change work?
It's a complex web of intermediaries. A tanker loaded with Russian fuel might sail to a specific coordinate off the coast of Cyprus. They turn off their tracking transponders, pull alongside another vessel, and pump the fuel across.
A ship-to-ship transfer.
Exactly. Then they might blend it with fuel from another country entirely, which physically changes the chemical signature. Or they offload it into massive storage tanks in Italy, where it mixes with oil from 5 different nations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so when a new ship comes to pick it up, the Russian origin is practically untraceable. The paperwork is clean, the origin is effectively laundered.
That is wild. It's like money laundering, but with diesel. And the report also mentioned that the United States is directly involved in this mix too, right? But for military stuff.
Yes, and this is a crucial distinction. While the civilian economy relies a lot on that opaque commercial shadow fleet, the United States directly supplies special military fuels, specifically JP-8 aviation fuel.
Okay, and that comes straight from the U.S.
Yes, via direct, highly secure maritime routes. So they bifurcate the supply. The commercial stuff might face bottlenecks if sanctions are suddenly enforced, but the direct U.S. supply ensures the military apparatus, the fighter jets, are completely immune to that volatility.
The jets keep flying no matter what the shadow fleet is doing.
Exactly.
So when you synthesize all this data, the pipeline avoiding the Gulf, the shadow fleet laundering the refined oil, the direct military fuel, it all points to this core argument in the source material, this idea that energy crises are not natural disasters.
Right. The dominant media narrative always treats an oil shock like it's inevitable, like a hurricane or a lightning strike that you just have to suffer through.
But the Metallurary intelligence argues that's completely false.
It really pushes back on that. They argue that crises are the sum of calculated political choices. They are long-term built dependencies and conveniences that outlive whatever moral declarations a country makes.
So what does this all mean for the listener? I mean, when you are driving down the street next week and you see gas prices suddenly spike 30 cents, you aren't just seeing the result of a faraway war.
No, you really aren't.
You are paying the price for decades of invisible supply chain decisions made by your government. Other countries chose the cheap, vulnerable route, and now their citizens are paying for it.
And this raises an important question about how nations actually plan for survival. Israel's strategy proves that vulnerability is a choice.
Right.
Because they structured their supply to aggressively avoid the Persian Gulf, the source actually argues that Israel was able to dictate the timing of its war with Iran. The report uses a very specific term. It categorizes Israel as an umpire of the current crisis rather than a victim of it.
An umpire. Wow, they're calling the balls and strikes on the timeline?
Exactly. And again, to maintain our neutrality, this categorization by the source is an analysis of strategic leverage, not an endorsement of their political or military actions.
Of course. It just means their domestic economy isn't the thing forcing them to the negotiating table. They aren't running out of gas, so they don't have to stop the war early.
Precisely. It's a master class in risk mitigation.
Okay, so let's briefly recap this journey we've been on. We started with the absolute paradox of Israel completely avoiding a Middle East oil shock that they are centrally involved in.
Which led us to unpack that massive 70% reliance on Eurasian pipelines, specifically that BTC pipeline running right through rival Turkish territory.
Right. And then we got into the deeply shadowy Mediterranean network of Russian refined oil, the ship-to-ship transfers, the origin laundering, and the ultimate lesson from all this data is that energy dependence basically dictates your foreign policy.
It absolutely does.
The invisible decisions made 20 years ago about where to lay a pipe decide the outcomes of today's wars.
They really do. And I want to leave you with a lingering question to ponder, something to think about long after this deep dive ends.
Oh, lay it on us. What is it?
Well, we are constantly taught that global trade is a force for peace, right?
Right, the idea that if economies are connected, they won't fight.
Exactly. But if enemy nations can quietly cooperate to keep the oil flowing through pipelines, and if they can use hidden ship transfers to bypass sanctions during a major war, does global trade actually prevent conflicts?
Oh, wow.
Or does it just perfectly insulate the combatants so the wars can continue indefinitely?
That is a staggering thought. Does the trade stop the war or just build the perfect shock absorber so you never have to stop fighting?
It's a dark thought, but the data really forces you to ask it.
It really does. It completely changes the way you look at a transit pipeline or, a random tanker sitting off the coast of Cyprus. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden currents of the global energy market. Keep looking past the headlines, keep questioning the underlying architectures of the world, and we will catch you next time.